Okay, and we're back. First of all, I included word counts to draw your attention to one kind of obvious issue. The originals where the writer is citing sources and just talking about information, contents from the sources was too wordy, too long. And I made it shorter and more concise. And it's not just the length. It's the fact that the originals have too much details. Details that are not really relevant. Some of the details are not really relevant. For example, maybe some of the procedures in their studies, in their research, the steps they did, or other times I see, for example, writers talking about so many unnecessary details, like too much detail about, again, the steps done in their research, how they conducted their research, how many people participated in their study, things like that. They're not really relevant. What's relevant is what is the key point of the source that you're citing. If you're citing a research study, for example, what's the key point? What's the main idea? Or what's the main implication for the paper that I am writing? If I'm a student and I'm writing a paper, or as a professor, if I'm writing an academic paper, I need to talk about what's the main idea. What's the main point of this paper I'm citing? What's the main implication? Or what's the main really cool finding or result that's relevant to my paper? So in the original paragraph, it's not clear what the point of the paragraph is for 1A and 2A. What's the point of the paragraph? It's not very clear. What is the writer getting at? And this is a common problem for new writers. You have maybe some good ideas, and you go to Google, you do a Google search, and you get all this stuff, and you import it into your paper. And in these cases, the writers try to cite sources they cited sources properly, and they try to paraphrase and summarize, but not enough. They didn't do enough summarizing. So what newer, less experienced writers do is they put all this information in their paper. They get sources and information from sources in a Google search, and they put it in their paper. And yeah, they try hard to cite it properly and to reword things. But there's too much information, and the writer's ideas get lost. Your own ideas as a writer, they get lost. What's this paragraph about? Where is it going? It reads like an information dump. The writer has simply gotten a bunch of information and dumped it into the paper. And yes, there's proper paraphrasing and source citation, but it still reads like an information dump. What's the point? And thus it seems like the writer has not really engaged with the text and the ideas. What's the main idea? If you understand the main idea, summarize it very nicely and clearly for me in your paragraph, and make it short enough so that your main point, the main point of your paper, the main point of your paragraph does not get lost. What's the main point of your paragraph in writing? What are you trying to tell me? If you dump in a lot of information, that gets lost. It's not coherent. It's incoherent, it's kind of rambling, going here and there, a lot of unnecessary details, and your main idea is not clear. The information and ideas or data from the source needs to be integrated into your paragraph. It needs to connect with your main idea, your topic sentence, your main points, your explanations. And don't just dump information from a source, so-and-so said this, found this, studied this. What's the point? They found such and such, which provides support for my point in this paragraph. Explain how this relates to your main idea. How does this show what you're talking about? How does this maybe explain to us or prove to us the point you're trying to make? What point are you trying to make with this? And some other things is a choppy flow, sometimes short sentences. So they just talk about one study, what they did, and it's like a very dry kind of repeat of what the study did, and maybe a statement of what they found. that could be all summarized, and you can kind of focus more on what's the key finding or the key implication. Other details, who did it, what did they do, that can be shortened and kind of put more in the background. And so that can be backgrounding more. And the main idea, that's probably like a main clause in a sentence, the main finding or the main implication that you want to use to support your idea in your paragraph, that's something you're going to kind of foreground, but again, not so much itself, but connect it with your main idea. So for example, putting, and there's nothing wrong with, say, putting the author's names in the sentence, Seinfeld and Kramer's study, but doing that every sentence, it gets boring. Sometimes you can kind of background that information. One study showed a significant impact. In the revised version, 1B, one study showed a significant impact of da-da-da. That finding is highlighted. Other information is backgrounded more in the revised version. The authors, so some of the details of what they did, that's either left out or it's kind of put more in the background by shortening those descriptions and leaving out some minor details. So your background may be less important information. Who did it? Who did the study? And the steps in their experiment. The key idea is what is their finding or their implication for you. So you see in the revised versions, a lot of the details were shortened. Some things are put in parentheses, other things are cut out. 2A, features of da-da-da have been explored. Okay, that's really boring. It's very choppy. It's kind of this choppy flow, chop, chop, chop. Choppy flow, these short sentences that put a lot more emphasis on minor details. Of course they've been explored. That's what this study is about. That's what the paper is about. So the revised version instead provides kind of a main idea sentence at the beginning about kind of research and what it's found. And several studies have been combined into maybe one longer sentence. And yes, longer sentences are fine like this in academic writing. You see that. So a couple of studies are described very briefly, and then a couple of other more studies are described in the next sentence. It's not only shorter, it's more focused. Or focus on the main ideas. Main idea that the writer's wanting to convey. What has the research shown us about this topic? That's the main idea that the writers are trying to convey here. And the revised versions do that much more clearly. So the writer's main ideas kind of come through the whole paragraph. So it's not like an information dump. You're just reading random collected bits of information. 1B, 2B flow better for those reasons. The connections between ideas are clear. And the connections, especially with the main idea of the paragraph, is clearer. So common problems of writers, too much minor details, background informations, summaries that are wordy, too much attention to all kinds of details, how the research was done, maybe their theoretical background, maybe that's not important here, and other things. Reporting expressions that are redundant, so-and-so studied this, reported this, did a study on this, indicated. Sometimes those can be left out. A lot of repetition of the same words and phrases. Instead, you cut out a lot of the fat, the unnecessary details. Only include the essential information, make it as concise as possible, and focused on your main point. So those are some common problems. And the best way to get better at this is to practice writing. You read an interesting paper. If you really want to improve your English writing skills, just read an interesting article, whether it's a news article or a research article, or an article you read in a class. Write your own summary. Write your own summary just for practice. Helps you to understand the stuff better. Aside from improving your English, it will help you to understand the contents better. Okay, so we've talked a bit about paraphrasing and summarizing, and they're kind of similar. They go together. Let's look at an exercise on page 80. So this is an exercise not just in plagiarism, but also paraphrasing and summarizing, and some things we do in paraphrasing and summarizing, and the use of a citation system, in this case, again, the APA citation system. So let me give you a question first. When you paraphrase or summarize from a source, what things do you change and how do you change them? Pause the video and actually talk about this for a minute. What things do you change? How do you change them when you paraphrase and summarize? Discuss this for a minute. Okay, next on page 80, let's do this exercise. So what we have here are first, like the 1A's, 2A. Those are paragraphs from an original research journal article. It's an article on language education in Korea. And we have the original, and then we have maybe like a B and sometimes a C or so on. And those are examples of students, let's say college students or graduate students, using this as a source and trying to use information from the source and properly using it, paraphrasing and citing it. What I want you to do is look at the original text and compare the examples of the student writing samples here. And so in 1A you have the original source, and 1B and 1C students using this, and then 2A another excerpt, another few paragraphs from the original research article, and 2B another student citing this, and so on. Are the student writers properly paraphrasing, summarizing, and citing the sources? Are they using the sources properly? If not, why? Or could they do it better? I want you to do this and, if possible, get into a video chat with somebody and look at these and discuss these for a while, and we'll come back and discuss these together. And we're back. So let's compare 1A, an original, the source, what is being used for the source of the student essay samples in 1B and 1C. So 1B, what do you think of 1B? Good writing? No, this is pretty bad. One, this is a copy and paste job. The student has copied and pasted the exact wording. No attempt at all to change anything. That's pretty bad. And there's no citation of the source. The wording, the information is from a source. That needs to be cited somehow. It's not. What would you do to a student? If you were the teacher, what would you do to the student? In my case, well, I would might at least make the student redo it. And if I do catch students doing this, it's not too often, I make them do it. If it's serious enough, I will make them redo, like if it's a significant plagiarism in a paper, a whole essay, I will make them redo the essay for a chance to simply pass the class. Not get a good grade, but just to pass it with a D or a C. And I'm pretty generous because in some places, in North America and Europe, for example, you could get kicked out if it's a serious plagiarism. One time I was actually teaching at another university, this was years ago. A student plagiarized a paper, and of course it's easy to tell because suddenly there's one paragraph that's in perfect English. And it was actually, I think, one or two whole paragraphs, large paragraphs, copied word for word, verbatim from online academic sources. She strongly denied that she'd plagiarized. It was obvious she did. I can easily go on Google and search and find exactly where she got the text from. It was an entire one or two paragraphs copied directly into her paper. And we gave her a C. She had to come back another semester and repeat the class, and that was very generous. It was actually generous because it was not like a degree program. It was a TESOL program, more of a certificate program, not a degree program, not like a master's degree. In other countries, TESOL, teaching English as a second language, would be a master's program, saksa, but here in Korea it's more of a one semester certificate program. So because of that, we were nice and let her come back and finish the course and her certificate. Another problem with 1B is, well, not all sources are great, and the original paper, as you can see in the footnote, the original research article was written by d2s2, and these are two scholars. They're, I think, kind of known. The Dernier is kind of known in the field of applied linguistics, and d2s2, I think, was kind of well known in Korea, who was a foreign professor in Korea at one time. So the overall article, the original article is generally good, but it starts out in South Korea, the site of a research project. There's a conscious effort to provide equal educational opportunities for secondary school children, and it cites Seth, 2002. Does that need to be cited? Isn't it obvious? It's a very obvious fact. It's boring, it's mundane. The original authors, d2s2 and Dernier, did not need to cite that. They could have left that out. It's not really informative. Wouldn't any school system at least attempt to provide equal opportunities for the kids? Of course, it's obvious. It's not informative or interesting. If they're going to cite Seth, they should cite something more interesting from the Seth article. So that's bad enough. The rest of this article by d2s2 and Dernier is actually interesting, but the first sentence is just bad. And that bad sentence is repeated in 1B in the student sample. So 1B is outright plagiarism, just serious plagiarism, and for both reasons, on two counts: copying, pasting, and not citing a source. So it's plagiarism. It meets both criteria for plagiarism. It only needs to meet one to be plagiarism: either copying and pasting, or not summarizing, paraphrasing. That's plagiarism. And then not citing a source, that's plagiarism. So here, this is doubly bad plagiarism. 1C, the second sample, is it good? Yes. There's a proper citation, d2s2 and Dernier, 2008. That's an APA style citation. Authors, comma, year. It is reduced to one sentence, the main point. And that's it. All the boring, unnecessary details are left out, and only something that's relevant to maybe the student's paper is kept in. Now 2A, here we have a long excerpt from the original with several paragraphs. 2B, student writing. Is this a good summary? Yes, it is. I think so. It does a very good job of distilling. It does a very good job of distilling, or kind of condensing, the main ideas from the original. Even though it's a fairly detailed description of their research methods, it's reduced to one paragraph. So about 3 longer paragraphs are reduced to one paragraph. Now, one paragraph summary is still kind of long. When you summarize from a source, how long is your summary usually? Depending on how important the source information is to your paper, it might be half a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, maybe longer if it's a really important source, if it's got really important information or ideas for your paper, for the development of your ideas. In this case, this is a detailed description of their study and the research methods. Would you likely write this in a college paper? No. So something like 2B would be maybe more typical of writing in graduate school. If you're doing a master's or PhD thesis, or if you're a professor writing a paper to be published, a research paper. And even then, most of the time when you cite sources and that kind of academic writing, it's again half a sentence, 1 sentence, 2 sentences. But a longer summary like this might be done in certain cases where you really we want to examine or critique their research methods. So if there's something in particular about the study that is important to you, like in this case, critiquing the research methods, that is maybe one case where a long summary, a long paraphrase like this might be done. In this case, the writer, the student writer, maybe wants to criticize the way the research methods were done, or maybe they want to improve upon it, or they maybe want to do similar study, use similar research methods for his or her own study. And those are cases where you might do detailed discussion of research methods. But otherwise, you would usually just summarize the main important finding or implication of the study, what is relevant to your purposes as a writer, in half a sentence or 2 sentences. Okay, 3A, the original, deals with no motivation. And you see at the end of 3A, for recent review, see dernier 2005 Ushioda Impress. So that impress means the writers of this article, d2s2, dernier, have a paper by Ushioda which is about to be published, maybe in an academic research journal, but it's maybe online on the journal website, or maybe they got it from Ushioda himself or herself somehow. So it hasn't been published yet, but they have it and they're citing it. And then it says see dernier 2005, means there are a bunch of other sources in there. We don't need to cite them all. Go read it yourself. 3B, student writer. What do you think of this? Has the writer attempted to paraphrase or summarize stuff? No. Minimal paraphrasing, minimal changing of words, but a very lazy attempt at changing words. It's mostly a copy and paste job with a little bit of changing. Now there's no kind of magic number like you have to change 48% or 72%. It really depends on the kind of writing that you're talking about. But this is obviously lazy. This is kind of plagiarism here. And I would make the student do it again. This is lazy. The writer has made little attempt to change the wording. The writer has made very little, almost really no attempt to change the wording in any real way. And thus the writer is kind of doing an information dump and not really dealing with the main ideas of the paper and thinking about, okay, what are my ideas? What are my ideas? What am I as a writer, as a student writer, trying to convey to the reader? Instead, the writer is just dumping this and changing a little bit. Very lazy. It should be shorter, and then it should be, okay, what does this mean to my point as a writer, the student writer doing this? What does this mean for my paper? Why am I citing this? What point in my paragraph does this prove or illustrate or explain? It should tell us. Cite information from the source and then tell us, okay, how does that explain or prove or support your point in your paragraph that you are writing? Number 4 is original, and this deals with statistics, tungehack, so this might be a little hard for you, so I'll help you. 4B, simple, the student writing. It's sort of a copy and paste job. There's some changing of the wording. Is a source cited? No, there's no citation of the source, and that's a problem. Now, some things you cannot change. Can you change technical words? No. Principal component analysis, that's a technical term. Can you change that? It's really hard to change technical terms. Jargon, or what we call jargon, which is, or a more technical term for jargon is nomenclature. That is the specific vocabulary of a specific field, the specialized academic vocabulary of a field, or technical vocabulary of a technical field. So you can't change that. So in paraphrasing, what do you change? Well, aside from technical terms, you try to change other important words. So important words are content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives. You try to change those as much as possible, and and then you try to combine sentences, and maybe try to combine it all into maybe one sentence, two sentences, or half a sentence, or something like that. And in the process of maybe compressing things into, half a sentence to two sentences or so, and changing the content words, the nouns and verbs and adjectives, the other stuff will change too. The other minor words will get kind of thrown out, and the sentence structure is going to change a lot when you compress things down to one sentence. In 4C, you have a fairly good example. The writer has changed the wording. That's one thing. The order of things. The researchers reported da-da-da. And now one little problem. They changed principal component analysis to factor analysis. Some people might think those are kind of the same thing, but a statistics person, a statistician, will get angry at you, say, no, they're not the same thing. There's a technical difference between the two. I could explain it to you, but it would take a long time and it would put you to sleep, so I won't. They're not the same thing. So the writer has made a mistake, incorrectly trying to paraphrase a technical term, and it didn't work because they're not the same thing, they're different. So you have to be careful when you paraphrase to properly interpret and paraphrase and explain information from the source. That means you actually need to understand the source. Understand it well enough that you can explain it, that you can summarize it and use it intelligently in your paper to support one of your points. You can't just go online and get some stuff and dump it in your paper. It will be obvious that if you are dumping information into your paper that you do not understand. It will be obvious because you don't know how to use the information. In this case, it seems like the student has actually tried to understand the source information, as we'll see in a minute, but maybe the writer doesn't fully understand these kinds of more advanced statistics. But the rest of this is good though, because, well actually, they made a mistake in changing principal component analysis to factor analysis, but the rest of this does show the writer understands statistics, so this is kind of funny that they would do that. The writer is taking issue or kind of critiquing or criticizing the original article. In the original article, they said this is what our statistical results mean, and the student writer obviously understands statistics well enough here to kind of criticize how the authors interpreted their statistics. And so that is good. The writer here is showing he or she has understood the source and what the authors of the research paper are doing. And so sometimes you can do this. You can critique or criticize ideas from a source and provide your own kind of commentary, or argue with them, or use it to present these information from a source to present one side, and then take issue with it, and present your own position, and after this maybe the writer would want to cite a source for his or her own position or interpretation. So the writer has made a little mistake in the terminology, factor analysis, but has done a good job in trying to actually interpret and critique the statistics here. And it will be interesting to see what the student writer is going to do with that in the rest of the paragraph. Okay, number 5. Here is the original 5A, and there are a lot of sources cited in here. And 5B, the student writing. This is mostly a copy and paste job. It's kind of like the, number 3B we saw earlier. There's been a little bit of changing in wording, but it's largely copy and paste, including all the sources. So in 5B, the student writer is also copying the source citations from the original. And so the student writer is basically pretending yeah, I went to the library or online and I read all of these articles. I read the Guillaume Dernier 2008 and read the Brophy 2004, which is at the bottom of the paragraph, and the Ginsburg and Wodkowski 2000 and the Pintrick and Schunk 2000, and so on and so on and so on. No, you didn't read all that. You just copied and pasted it. Nonsense. So, the student here has committed plagiarism, very obviously, because obviously this student is not going to be the sort of person who would actually understand all of these sources and would have time to actually read and cite all of these sources. Number 5C and 5D are appropriate. 5C and 5D are quite appropriate use of the sources. Very short, concise paraphrase. The sources are cited. In fact, this is a question that students ask me in writing class. How do I cite actually a source that's cited by another source? So let's say I find, like I'm reading an article by Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith cites an article by Mr. Jones. And it's really good information. I want to use this information in my paper from Jones, but I can't get the Jones article. It's not available somehow. Either it's not online, it's not in the library, or maybe Mr. Jones wrote it in Chinese or something and I can't read that. So what the information from Jones that I want, I don't have it. I don't have the original Jones. What I have is Smith, who is citing Jones. So I can cite that. It's called a secondary citation. And 5C and 5D are kind of like secondary citations. Maybe because the original I don't have, or in this case, the original is just a bunch of stuff and I don't want to cite all of that stuff. So one way, see Guillaume Dernier 2008 for references. Or maybe in 5D, the Brophy 2004 is of particular interest, but let's say the student, for some reason, the student writer can't get the Brophy. So what the writer has done is e.g., that means for example, Latin abbreviation, e.g., Brophy 2004 and others as cited in Guillaume Dernier 2008. So you're citing the Brophy as Brophy was cited by Guillaume Dernier. That's a secondary citation. So you can do that. Various citation systems like APA, Chicago, MLA have kind of instructions or guidelines for how you do this, how you do a secondary citation. So 5D is a secondary citation. 3B or 3A is sort of also like a secondary citation at the end where it says for recent reviews, see so-and-so. It's sort of like a secondary citation also. So 5D, that's how you do a secondary citation if you have to do that, if you find yourself in that situation. So we have seen examples of the APA citation style. We will talk about that later. We have seen examples of good and bad use of sources and summarizing and paraphrasing and citations. One other little question on the, I think it's page 84, goes back to item number 2 in this exercise, 2A and 2B. And again, 2B is an unusually long paraphrase. Not something you would normally do. It's something you might see in more advanced academic writing. But comparing 2A and 2B on page 84, I'm going to leave you with a question to talk about. Think about this, talk about this with someone, and we'll come back to it next time. What are the particular grammatical devices that the writer of 2B has used? Here on page 284, the student writing sample, what are some particular grammatical devices or structures, forms, techniques that the student writer has used in condensing the original, to paraphrase, summarize the original? How has the writer changed things? What grammatical structures and forms has the writer used in writing the paraphrase in 2B? So that's in this little diagram. So compare that, discuss that, and I want to discuss this next time. So discuss that, sort of a little unofficial homework assignment. I will also send you a link to a Google form. You don't have to fill it out right away. You have about a week, but I'm going to ask you to kind of think about your topic for your midterm essay, and it will be due not exactly midterm week, but maybe a bit after that. So you have enough time. I will put some sample topics up on the class website. So go to the class website and start looking at those sample topics. If there's something you really, really want to do, maybe you can suggest it to me, but I'm kind of open if it's within the certain kind of parameters that I have in mind, certain kind of purposes that I have in mind for this. For example, there's a particular academic controversy in your field of study you want to write about, you want to take a position on something like that, I would be open to, in addition to the examples I have on the class website. So do that, start thinking about your midterm topics, and then I think about this little exercise on paraphrasing, grammatical paraphrasing devices or techniques. So have a good weekend, enjoy your homework, and I will see you, or you will see me, anyway, next time. Goodbye.